February 1946, Manhattan, the Stork Club. When Lucky Luciano stepped into the private room, the conversation died instantly. Cigars froze midair, chairs scraped backward as every man at the table stood up in respect. Every man except one. Bumpy Johnson stayed seated. His cigar burned slowly between his fingers. His eyes never left Luciano's face. 6 armed men tightened their grips. Jackets shifted. Guns were ready to come out. One wrong move and the room would explode. Lucky Luciano noticed it immediately. The tension. The silence. The fact that the man across from him didn't flinch, didn't rise, didn't apologize. Luciano lifted his hand. The gun stayed down, because the man sitting calmly in front of him controlled something Luciano needed more than muscle, more than fear, more than violence. Harlem. Specifically, the numbers racket, a river of money the Italian mob had never been able to fully touch. What Bumpy Johnson said in the next 60 seconds would decide everything, an alliance that would reshape organized crime, or a war that would turn New York into a graveyard. And the most dangerous part? Bumpy Johnson had already made up his mind before Lucky Luciano ever walked through the door. To understand why that room felt like it was holding its breath, you have to understand the moment New York was living in. The war was over. Soldiers were coming home. America was celebrating victory. But beneath the parades and headlines, the underworld was quietly rearranging itself. Lucky Luciano was back. After nearly a decade behind bars, he'd been released early thanks to a deal with the U.S. government. He'd helped keep the dock secure during the war, using his influence to protect vital supply lines. In return, his sentence was cut short. But freedom came with a price. Luciano was being forced out of the country. In a matter of weeks, he would be put on a ship and sent back to Italy, permanently. He would never be allowed to return. That meant Luciano had one final problem to solve before he left. New York. The Mafia families were stable. Leadership was in place. The docks were under control. The money was flowing almost everywhere. Almost. Harlem was different. The numbers racket up there wasn't just profitable, it was unstoppable. Small bets from working-class people added up to millions, week after week. And unlike other territories, Harlem wasn't ruled by fear alone. It was ruled by trust. That trust belonged to Bumpy Johnson. Years earlier, another man had tried to take Harlem by force. Dutch Schultz believed violence was enough. He sent shooters, he made threats, he ignored the people, and it got him killed. Bumpy Johnson learned from that mistake. He didn't just run operations, he protected neighborhoods, paid debts, solved problems, and made sure Harlem stayed standing. By 1946, Harlem wasn't just a territory, it was a system, and Lucky Luciano knew something Schultz never did. You don't conquer Harlem with guns. You either make a deal, or you lose everything trying. Lucky Luciano didn't rush this meeting. Men like him never did. Before reaching out, he watched. He listened. He asked questions. He wanted to know how Bumpy Johnson operated, how he moved money, how he kept Harlem loyal without flooding the streets with soldiers. Then Luciano sent a message, not a threat, not a demand, an invitation. Bumpy Johnson didn't answer right away. Days passed, then a full week. That silence was intentional. It told Luciano that this wasn't a man who jumped when summoned. If this meeting was going to happen, it would be on equal ground. The location was chosen carefully. An exclusive Manhattan club, private room, marble floors, soft lighting, a place where deals were made quietly and bodies didn't fall. Luciano arrived first. He brought his inner circle, men whose reputations didn't need introductions, strategists, enforcers, accountants, and just enough armed guards to remind everyone who normally controlled the room. This was supposed to be overwhelming. Bumpy Johnson arrived alone, no entourage, no visible protection, tailored suit, calm steps, a briefcase in his hand and nothing in his expression that suggested fear. As he entered, hands moved toward jackets. The guards closed ranks. Luciano stopped them with a glance. Bumpy walked straight to the table. He didn't ask where to sit. He took the chair usually reserved for the boss. The message was clear. We're not starting beneath anyone." Luciano opened the conversation smoothly. He spoke about order, about stability, about keeping New York quiet after the war. Then he got to the point. Harlem was producing too much money to ignore. Luciano didn't say takeover. He said partnership, investment, protection, access to banking, and legal support. In return, his people would take a percentage. The offer sounded reasonable. The implication behind it wasn't. If Bumpy agreed, Harlem would remain his, on paper. If he refused, Harlem would become a problem. Bumpy listened without interrupting. Let the words hang. Let the room grow uncomfortable. Because while Luciano believed he was setting the terms, Bumpy Johnson had already come prepared. And the moment Luciano finished speaking, the balance in the room quietly began to shift. Bumpy Johnson didn't respond right away. He took a slow breath, set his cigar down, let the silence stretch just long enough for discomfort to settle in. Then he reached for the briefcase he'd brought with him. The room tightened. Every man at that table had seen violence start over less. Bumpy opened the case and removed a single photograph. Nothing dramatic, no speeches. He slid it across the table toward Lucky Luciano. Luciano picked it up. The image showed one of his key operations outside Manhattan, a warehouse that wasn't supposed to exist. Standing in front of it was one of his most powerful men, caught mid-handshake with a police captain who wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the organization. Luciano's expression didn't change, but his fingers clenched. Bumpy spoke calmly. That photo was taken days earlier, and it wasn't the only one. He explained without raising his voice that there were more, different locations, different officers, different connections that kept the Mafia protected from prosecution. This wasn't a threat. It was information. Bumpy leaned forward slightly. If he wanted war, those photos would already be public. If he wanted revenge, the damage would already be done. But that wasn't why he was here. Luciano asked the question carefully. "What do you want?" That was the moment everything turned. Bumpy didn't ask for protection, didn't ask for permission. He laid out terms. A small percentage. Banking services only. Legal help when needed. No soldiers in Harlem, no collections on his streets, no guns showing up where they didn't belong. Harlem would remain Harlem. The room went still. This wasn't negotiation anymore. It was a line being drawn. Luciano looked around the table. His men wanted dominance. They wanted leverage. But they understood numbers and risk. After a long pause, Luciano smiled. Not because he'd won, because he'd just met someone who couldn't be bullied. And in that moment, the guns in the room stopped mattering. Lucky Luciano studied Bumpy Johnson for a long moment, not like an enemy, like a calculation. Then he laughed, not mockery, not disbelief. A quiet, honest laugh, the kind that comes when a man realizes he's met someone who understands the game as well as he does. Luciano extended his hand. The deal was accepted. A reduced share, limited involvement, no presence in Harlem. The money would move clean, quietly, and on schedule. No soldiers, no intimidation, no confusion about who controlled what. Bumpy stood and shook his hand. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But in that single moment, Harlem secured something it had never had before. Recognition without surrender. Weeks later, Lucky Luciano was gone. He boarded a ship and left the United States for the last time. But the agreement he made that night didn't leave with him. It held. Year after year, decade after decade, the numbers operation thrived. The money flowed exactly as promised. When trouble came, it was handled through lawyers and bankers, not gunmen. And when Bumpy Johnson was later arrested and sent away, his family was left untouched. The arrangement was honored even in his absence. That meeting became legend in the underworld. Not because shots were fired, not because blood was spilled, but because a man sat across from the most powerful mob boss in America and said no, without raising his voice or reaching for a weapon. Years later, Luciano would tell associates that Bumpy Johnson was the most dangerous kind of man, not violent, not reckless, but prepared. Bumpy never spoke publicly about that night. But those close to him said he kept the reminder nearby, not as leverage, but as proof. Proof that real power doesn't rush, it doesn't threaten, and it doesn't need a crown. If this story showed you a different kind of strength, subscribe to Crownless Tales. These are the stories they didn't put in the movies, the ones built on patience, strategy, and respect. Because history isn't always shaped by the loudest gun. Sometimes it's shaped by the man who never had to pull one.